Ladies and gentlemen, Psalms 41-3 says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. He brought me up out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. And he put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many see it and fear, and they trust in the Lord. That is so awesome. See, when you get saved, when you get a second chance, you let everybody know how you've been saved and who saved you. When you think of Superman, a lot of people love Superman because he's a savior. He saves them from trouble. Do people go back and find trouble again? Very few do, except for Lois Lane, of course. But very few get back into trouble again because they learned their lesson. They've gotten a second chance. That's what it's all about. You think about when you get a second chance in life, do you go back and do the same things that got you into problems before? No, of course you don't. Whether it's you ate wrong or you treated people badly or you treated yourself badly, whatever it is, you don't go back and repeat it. So I hope that this you carry with yourself today. If you get a second chance at life, go for it. Take nothing for granted. And remember, not repeating the same mistakes you did before, but try to carve out this new pathway that you've been given, a fresh start. Alright, let's get into the DCEU. This time we're looking at the villains of the DCEU. Here you can see Dr. Maru and General Ludendorff having a good laugh. And the reason they're having a good laugh is because, well, they threw in a gas into the room where generals, other generals of the, at the time, Kaiser's army of Germany, World War I, they were all assembled. They did not want to continue with the war but have an armistice. And as a result of that, Ludendorff asked Dr. Poison to throw in a chemical bomb. And so there was chemical gas in there. And Ludendorff throws in a gas mask. And Maru's like, well, Dr. General Ludendorff, that mask is not going to help them. And then Ludendorff says, they don't know that. Right there, he says that. And so they just break out in laughter, realizing that it's just going to make them scamper for the gas mask. They're going to realize it doesn't work, and it's just going to make them even more hopeless. And actually, Dr. Maru, just to tell you how horrible these people are, Dr. Poison, she goes and peeps through the window to see them struggling to find that gas mask and to see them struggle with the gas. So she's she's not a nice person, let's put it that way. But she's really a scientist at heart, and they find the brilliant formula for the chemical that can actually go through gas masks. Which, let me just say, as sinister as both of them are, they're pretty brilliant in that strategy, because that really could have gotten Germany to win the war. I mean, if your enemies have no defense for a gas that you're putting on the field, of course, eventually they would find a solution to it, and they may even use the same weapon against the Germans. But the point is that that's a really effective weapon to wipe out your enemy. And why not wipe out your enemy as much as you can very quickly, so have them surrender, and then after that you win the war, and therefore things are on your terms, which would make sense. And remember, General Ludendorff and Dr. Poison, they were working very hard. They weren't getting any sleep, none of that stuff, just to make sure that Germany could win this war. So they were as patriotic as you can get, even though they didn't really have the kind of morals that we have. But then in war, there's not much morals at all. People break rules of engagement. They do all kinds of things. We had the preemptive strike in Iran very not too long ago, on the guise that there were weapons of mass destruction, which weren't there. So you have to understand, war is a thing that is terrible, because basically in war there are no rules. There are no rules. You see, it's who's much more stronger, who's much more powerful. Of course, they talk about rules of engagement and blah, 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 but these rules are being broken now. So I just thought I would say that. Now let's look at all the villains of the DCEU and what make them so special and set apart from other comic book movies and other cinematic universes. There's only, as far as I do know right now, one other cinematic universe, which is the MCU. But Universal is starting off their Dark Universe, and I do believe that Paramount is going to push forward with Transformers in a Transformers universe, which very likely they can have, because they have so many different Transformers and just so many different things. You can have different spin-offs from that. So there are some other universes coming up over the horizon, but at present, you know, the cinematic universes we are talking about are the MCU and the DCEU. But when it comes to villains, I think the DCEU has the best villains so far and portrayals of them. We start off with the Kryptonian General Zod, Faora-El, and Namek. And General Zod has been a very impressive villain. And the nice thing I can tell you about the DCU, straight off the bat, in Man of Steel, the villain had a lot more dimension than just a bad guy. All of the villains we saw in the MCU were somewhat one-dimensional. You think of Loki. Loki was funny and everything, but he was one-dimensional. They put more dimension behind Loki after Man of Steel. It actually caused the MCU to kind of step up their game, give the backstory of Loki. I think it was in Thor 2, The Dark World, or something like that. We got some more backstory on Loki. But before that, no. So Man of Steel brought about General Zod. And the thing about General Zod, as much as he was a horrible person, a mean Kryptonian to even his own Kryptonian counterparts, the aristocracy, the leaders of Krypton, General Zod did have conviction, and he did have a point. He was there to protect and defend. The whole purpose he was genetically bred for was to protect and defend Krypton. And General Zod, earlier on, if you listen to even Zor-El's account, General Zod was a hero of Krypton, actually. He was a hero because he had actually been the person who fought off Doomsday from Krypton. So General Zod was not an ordinary guy. And he was a friend of Jor-El. And Jor-El said that I will respect you as the man that you once were, and not this monster that you've become. So General Zod was not really a monster all of his life, but he was very military, and he was really desperate to restore Krypton. And this narrative was going straight through from the beginning of the story. He was trying to restore Krypton by taking out certain, what he called, degenerated bloodlines from Krypton and restoring it back to what it was. You will notice that most of these villains, it's not that they're evil or anything, but it's just that they were looking for a way to spark back the life of Krypton. That's all General Zod was about. Of course, he didn't care about Earthlings, so he just cared about Kryptons and Kryptonians. And as a result of that, he was a villain in this movie. And he, of course, he had much more depth than the General Zod from the Superman 2, I think it was. But most people talk about the General Zod from Superman 2 because I guess they like the theatrical performance. But they don't really think about the depth to which this villain was. However, Faora-El, she's just the right-hand, ruthless, just menacing lieutenant of General Zod. When I say she's ruthless, I mean she is ruthless. She enjoys, however, a battle. She enjoys a challenge. Here she's smirking at Captain... I'm trying to remember his surname, but it will come to me. Yeah, she's smirking at him because he can absolutely do absolutely nothing to her. I mean, he can't hurt her in any kind of way, shape, or form. Okay? Now, after Man of Steel, we had Batman v Superman. Now, people said that Lex Luthor was annoying to them, so they disengaged. Quite frankly, Lex Luthor was annoying to me as well. But I stayed with the character. It's still a character I hate. I don't like him at all. The character itself. This depiction of Lex Luthor is hateable. You want to see him die by the end of the movie. You want to see this guy die. But you're kind of scared of him. That he can just turn on you and then it'll be it for you. And Lex Luthor reminds me a lot of modern day professors and people who've been vindictive towards students, or modern day conglomerate people like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates. Very, very powerful people, but physically they're not very powerful, but mentally they play mind games with other people. And in this case, the thing with Lex Luthor, he wasn't crazy like he's about chaos like the Joker, or he's not like the Riddler. People say he's like Jim Carrey, or he's like Heath Ledger's Joker. No, he's not that at all, because Lex Luthor is not spontaneous. He's not spontaneous. He plans everything. But he is very, very vindictive, very spiteful, sometimes very petty. And people like this who are in power, they tend to want to pay back people who may have taken advantage of him or been seen as the jock, and someone who might have been able to bully them when they were younger. So I think of this version of Lex Luthor as that kind of person. And everything Lex Luthor says has a meaning and consequence to it. As much as he looks frivolous and someone to take lightly, you do not take Lex Luthor lightly, okay? From the Granny's peach tea scene to this little introduction here where Lex Luthor arranges for Bruce Wayne to meet Clark Kent. He deliberately did that. And then to throw spite in the water. He knows something they don't know, and he's flaunting it in front of their face, okay? So he says, Bruce Wayne meets Clark Kent. Ha! I love bringing people together. And that sounds funny, and it sounds flippant, and it sounds frivolous. But believe you me, it is as evil and as sinister as you can possibly think, because Lex Luthor has brought them together for them to kill each other. And so he's happy that they've met each other. And then he says, I love bringing people together. And then he shakes Bruce. He says, Bruce. Then he shakes Clark Kent's hand and he says, ow, that's a good grip. You shouldn't pick a fight with this person. He says that to Bruce Wayne, knowing that he's setting it up for Bruce Wayne to fight Clark Kent, a.k.a. Kal-El, a.k.a. Superman. Okay? He knows Bruce Wayne is Batman, and he knows Clark Kent is Superman. Now, the thing that makes this so much different too, and people talk about Captain America Civil War, which is bullshit compared to this, okay? It's just pure bullshit compared to this. But this, which makes it so brilliant, is that Lex Luthor, this is the guy pulling the strings. And he meets both of them in person. Now, he's been manipulating them from afar, okay? He's been manipulating Clark Kent, sending him little notes and stuff about Batman. And he's been manipulating Bruce Wayne, sending him little notes and stuff about Superman, which is Clark Kent. So he decides to meet them in person, okay? And this is how a professor in a university, they would actually tell you to your face what's going to happen next, but in code. Because they know what they know, and you don't know what they know. Or some sort of politician, they'd be telling you something in code, but you can never get them for it because they know something you don't know. And this is what's going on right here. Lex Luthor knows something that Clark and Bruce do not know, showing you how intelligent he is. And he has a lot of knowledge on a lot of things. The other thing that makes Lex Luthor sort of scary, I remember the peach tea incident where he recalls what Senator Finch says, and he knows Senator Finch is onto him. She won't incriminate him, but she definitely won't allow him to get the kryptonite into the United States of America. So what does he do? He comes to her face. He talks to her face. And he says two things. The first thing he says is, you know what's the greatest lie in America, Senator? Now, he started that sentence, he started that conversation with the senator in private when he said, you know what's the greatest lie in America, Senator? Can I call you June? So you can call me whatever you want. You can take a bowl of piss and call it Granny's peach tea. You can take a weapon of assassination and call it a deterrent. You will not pull a fly on me. And what does Lex Luthor say? He says nothing, right? He listens, and then after he realizes that his facade is all over, he says, so you and I know better now, Senator. Devils don't come from hell beneath us. They come from the sky. And you hear his sinister voice and his earnestness in the fact that he thinks Superman is a devil. And here's the interesting thing about it. He finishes off what he said to the senator before in the room, because he never got to finish what he had to say. So when he sees her, he says, a certain senator, junior senator from Kentucky, is soft on security. You remember that? See, I haven't even watched the film in a little while, and I still remember these words. And he says to her, Senator, do you know it's going to get hot in there, Junebug? And she said, I know how to wrestle a pig. All right? But he knows what he's saying. He literally knows because, again, he knows something she does not know. And everything he's saying you should really pay attention to with Lex Luthor. As flippant and as seemingly awkwardly sociable as he seems to be, there's something sinister he's doing all the time. And he's always steps ahead of everybody. But the senator couldn't pick it up. And then he says, you know what the greatest lie in America is, Senator? And his face gets serious and almost sad as he says this. He says, the greatest lie in America is that power can be innocent. And then he walks away. And you can see the sad look on his face as he says that. And quite frankly, I've never seen a villain so layered and so complex as Lex Luthor, in that they've been able to get so much dimension to this guy. A guy who's kind of sad that he's doing what he's doing, the evil that he's doing. And yet he's compelled, and he believed very strongly this is the only way to go. That you have to be absolutely corrupted to have absolute power. Yet he regrets it. And you hear him talk again as if he's trying to basically purge himself by talking about how he learned way back that God cannot be all powerful and all innocent because he wasn't there to save him from daddy's fist and abominations. That means his father probably sodomized him and did him all kinds of things. So Lex Luthor is not your average cat. Okay? He ain't your average cat. And he's really, really smart. He's not about chaos. He believes that if you are to be absolutely powerful, you must be absolutely corrupt. And he believes Superman's either corrupt or he's not absolutely powerful. It's one or the other. And he's going to expose them one way or the other. And so it's literally a fundamental belief system of this man that evil is the only thing that can be all powerful. Because his father taught him that. So that's really powerful. And that's a DCEU villain you'll never find anywhere else. The MCU's tried to do something, but they still don't know. They have no idea. I can't remember what the villain's name was in Civil War. But he was just a victim of something that happened. Okay? He's not a real villain. Okay? When we talk about real villains, we're talking Lex Luthor. Very powerful villain. Then we have General Zod returning as Doomsday. Okay, because basically General Zod's body was used and an abominable act, Doomsday was produced. We also had KG Beast, which was Lex Luthor's right-hand man. Ruthless and will do what is necessary to cover up. So, we had Fair-Oil, who was ruthless. We have KG Beast, who was ruthless. Now, when we get to Suicide Squad, we see a number of villains. We have Enchantress. It's her in her transformed form. We've got Incubus, who was the brother of Enchantress. There wasn't much dimension to Incubus or Enchantress. But then we meet Diablo. And for the first time we meet villains who must be villainous, but yet it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. To be able to stop this threat, these villains need to be villainous and do whatever they want in terms of villainy. And so they kill a lot of people who have now been transformed. There's a lot of killing going on in this movie. But people sort of justify it by saying, oh, they're not people anymore. They're kind of like zombie kind of things. They're the eyes of Enchantress and Incubus, whatever. But they kill a lot of people in this movie. You have Harley Quinn and the Joker. Harley Quinn, of course, being a fan favorite in this movie. I have Killer Croc, who's the eats people. We had Deadshot in this movie, who's an assassin. And we had Boomerang in this movie, who was a thief. And we had, oh wow, I just forgot. I just blanked out on his name. That's how short he was in this movie. But we had him. And of course, the real villain. The villain of all villains in this particular movie. The Lex Luthor of this movie is, of course, Amanda Waller. And boy, she is vicious. But again, we are in a whole set of villains. These are villainous people. And, of course, Argus, or Task Force X, is very unconventional. They don't follow the usual rules. The only rule they follow is make sure and get through the objective, however and by whatever means. And Amanda Waller, she's villainous. She's not a good person, okay? So, and she is about saving her skin to make sure this project continues onwards. And so Amanda Waller is villainous, but yet at the same time, she besides being ruthless, she still has a code under which she works. And that is that these criminals must be kept in check. She must keep them under control to complete the mission. Once the mission is completed, they can get certain negotiated terms granted to them, right? And then we had Wonder Woman. And in Wonder Woman, we have General Ludendorff, who was just a very determined general to try and win the war. And again, very admirable, but mostly importantly, General Ludendorff himself is actually based on a real person, on a real figure from World War I. There was an actual General Ludendorff that actually existed. And his mindset of this general is very similar to the mindset of the general in Wonder Woman. And what's very interesting about that as well is that even though General Ludendorff dies in Wonder Woman, he did not die. He survived World War I. I must say that his ideology and his belief system and even the Greek mythos of his mindset is very similar to General Ludendorff, who existed in World War I. Of course, we also have Dr. Moreau, also known as Dr. Poison. The joke that was made was based off of her throwing this chemical bomb inside of the room of the German generals. Now, for those people who are saying, oh, in this movie the Germans were bad guys. No, they weren't. The Germans were not bad guys at all. They were opposition, but they weren't bad guys. The bad guys in this movie were Dr. Moreau and General Ludendorff. If you even look, the captain of the army was saying, men have gone for days without food and rest. No food, no rest. And what did General Ludendorff say? General Ludendorff said, we need to be on guard all the time. And we need to work harder. And he says, what would happen if someone would just come in and gun us down? And he says to the young man, he says to him who's talking, the German soldier, he says, let's demonstrate it to them, shall we? And he just takes out his gun and shoots him. Alright? The bad guys in this movie were Ares, Ludendorff, and Dr. Moreau. The German army, they're just soldiers following orders. They're just doing what they can so that they could win the war, so the war can end. Okay? So that's why Wonder Woman came to the realization that everyone's under the influence of Ares. She realized Steve was under the influence of Ares. She realized that the Germans were not the only bad people that Steve was claiming they were. He was a bad person as well. And mankind had to be purged. And then Steve comes back and asks her to help him with stopping the bombs. And she says no, because she's realizing Steve's also done some terrible things. And he's just as bad as them. So you have to understand that in Wonder Woman, it wasn't the generals who were the bad people and the Allies weren't. In fact, if you look, both the Germans and the Allies were wearing gas masks in the war. You go to the war on any front line or anything, you were seeing people with gas masks on. So it has to be made clear that in Wonder Woman, you had to know who the real bad guys were. And the bad guys in this movie were not the Germans. The Germans were looking to plead amnesty. Okay? Both sides had committed some huge atrocities. And you heard Steve Trevor talk about it. They were saying, Wonder Woman asked Diana asked him, What kind of terrible things kill people and innocent children? And Steve Trevor answers, every kind of weapon. All kinds of weapons. And Steve is not excusing himself from doing evil things. In fact, Steve goes on to say, I have smuggled things, I've lied, I have stealed, right? He did those things as a spy. And he even confessed to her, I'm a spy, I lie, that's what I do. Remember he said that? You can see that Steve, he wants to do something else because he's tired, he's sick of the war. And now he's trying to save lives on both sides of the war. He's not just trying to save lives on the Allies side, but on both sides of the war. And the generals, they don't care. They like, if they die, that's part of war, you know. And Steve's like, no. And Diana and Steve still goes on the mission to try and stop Ludendorff and Dr. Moreau. Those are the guys. It's not the soldiers. It's not all those other people. Those people are just kind of tools that Moreau and Ludendorff are using to try and win the war. Right? The Allies, it was like a long war. The Allies are trying to get an amnesty going. The Germans are trying to get the amnesty because they realize the Germans and the other allies of the Germans, they're not going to. They're not going to stop. They're not going to declare they lost the war. So an amnesty would stop the war on both sides, and then they could have peace. So that's what they were looking for. So anyway, that was proposed by, of course, none other than Sir Patrick Morgan, who turned out to be Ares. And he explained what was behind that. So I'm just saying, when you look at General Ludendorff and Dr. Moreau, again, very interesting villains with an interesting twist and an interesting story. And again, I challenge anyone. They're talking about all these villains were just throwaway villains. I challenge anyone. Show me a villain in the MCU that was better than them. I think the best villain I've seen in the MCU so far has been Red Skull. That's it. Red Skull and his scientist friend. And his scientist friend wasn't a true villain because in the end he had his allegiance to Hitler, and then when he realized that Red Skull had some other plan, he was really hesitant to follow Red Skull. Okay, but in terms of the best villain I have seen so far in the MCU, it's Red Skull. All the talk about all the other villains, even Ultron, who was an interesting villain and he created an interesting product. Ultron was still not even as good a villain as all the other villains we've had in the DCEU so far. The weakest villain, which is Enchantress, is a better villain than most of the MCU villains we've seen so far. They've been very, very weak. I think Age of Ultron, I think Ultron himself has been a better villain than maybe one or two of them. But most of these villains are not great at all. They're not great. So I don't understand how the MCU people say, oh, well, Wonder Woman had throwaway villains and shut up. Shut up. Anyway, let's move on. Then we have David Thewlis, who's playing Sir Patrick Morgan. Here you see him levitating in the sky as Wonder Woman is trying to avoid debris that he's throwing at her. This is when he's taking on the form of Ares. He's going into the costume with all of these scrap metal that he's just pulling together to form this scrapped up suit, because it's not really a fully formed suit. He doesn't have the true power that he once had as Ares, that he could get that beautiful blue armored suit on. He no longer is that. He's kind of like a fallen angel. He's kind of like Lucifer. He's weakened. So he scraps together this scrappy suit and he goes to war with this scrappy suit, right? And eventually what happens is that you see Ares coming out of the flames here, and eventually he fights Diana. And in that final confrontation, this guy just pulls together all of these, metals and stuff and starts hurling all these projectiles at Wonder Woman. But she's got this energy force where she can just repel everything, which is really awesome. Now, I heard, I think it was Tyron Magnus, I heard him saying that Ares is, he's kind of like the X-Men. I forgot what his name is, who is able to manipulate iron and metals. Magneto. He's saying he's Magneto. No, Ares is not Magneto. Ares can move telekinetically things, alright? And he started levitating. And then Wonder Woman realized she could kind of telekinetically do some of that. As you see here, this is her powers here, and she just kind of repels everything. And when she burst out of that, the tractor iron part of the tank that he used to basically surround her and keep her down, and she just burst out of it. There's this energy force that comes out of her and she's able to repel things, and she's even able to sort of levitate in the air because of that. She has this kind of telekinetic power as well. But Aries basically moves things by telekinesis. Okay, so he can move metals, he can move this, he can survive explosions, he can. You saw him just pull Dr. Maru from wherever she was, crash the car she was in, roll her out of the car. Aries has that telekinetic power to be able to do that. He's a very powerful god. But apparently Wonder Woman has destroyed at least his physical form. I don't know. I believe Aries still has another form. He still has his substance. Aries, the spirit of Aries, is somewhere around. But in terms of his physical form, destroyed it completely with the thunderbolt that Aries has hurled at her. So it's very impressive what Aries has done in this movie. I can understand why some people think that David Thewlis' performance at the end was a little bit too dramatic, because he kept on yelling at certain points in time, which I thought was, if you're such a powerful god, why do you have to yell? You know what I mean? But he was quite effective up to, I think, the final moments of the fight sequence, when he was saying "do it" to her when she was going to crush Dr. Maru with the tank. I thought he was excellent up to that point, and then a little bit after, he seemed to be just kind of a little bit too over the top dramatically. But it's expected, because he's fighting someone who he knows can bring the end to him, because she's the weapon to destroy him, right? So I can kind of get it. But I always thought, he could disappear, he could move this place, he could move that place. Why didn't he do that, when she was about to strike him with the lightning bolt? I'm not quite sure if all his energy was depleted or something. I don't really quite understand. But anyway, I thought it was good. I liked how Aries looked. Even though he looked more like a scrap heap put together, I still liked how he looked. It was fantastic. I look at that fight sequence, and it teaches me so much, because Aries had a point. And Diana did not dismiss him as lying, because Aries wasn't lying to her. He was telling her the truth. He really was, but he wasn't the god of truth, obviously. But he was telling her the truth about mankind. But she was right. Mankind is not just those things. It's also so much more. They can be loving, they can be kind, they can show love and stuff like that. So she was able to see both sides. I remember when she chuckled at the beginning of Wonder Woman, when she chuckled about mankind, she was like, and mankind, and she chuckled after it. I think she gets it. She gets that mankind, they can be good or they can be bad, but it's up to them how they choose to be. And I think she gets it now. So I thought this was awesome. And I think on reflection now, I heard a lot of people say that the final fight sequence was kind of an anticlimax, because they were hiding Aries, and then when we finally see Aries, he's not as much as we hyped him out to be. I think sometimes the CGI of Ares fighting was a little bit clumsy. Like when they were on top of a roof or something, and Wonder Woman lassoed Ares towards her, and Ares kind of started fighting, throwing certain things. You could tell it was CG. Just the movement. It was not how Ares looked. It was more the CG, how it kind of clunky, kind of puppet-like how Ares was moving. But for the most part, I still enjoyed Ares. And I enjoyed that he's scrapping together these kind of irons or metals or whatever weapons he was using to fight Diana. And I really enjoyed the fight, actually. I enjoyed the kind of godlike fight. It reminded me, I think Man of Steel, though, was General Zod versus Kal-El, was actually much more dramatic. Even though, again, the letdown was the final part of the scene. With Wonder Woman, I think you got a better finish to the scene. With Kal-El versus Zod, the anticlimactic part was not so much. There were two things. One, how did Kal-El kind of get the upper hand as they were careening through the sky? Zod was in control all the way, and then suddenly Kal-El was in control. I didn't understand that part. And the second part was where Kal-El snaps Zod's neck. I still didn't quite feel, this is just me, I didn't quite feel that Kal-El had Zod, that Zod couldn't get away from Kal-El, first of all, and then second of all, that I didn't feel compelled that Kal-El needed to snap his neck, because I didn't feel like Zod was fully in his grasp. I didn't feel Kal-El locked him down. After Kal-El pounded his head into the ground, that looked real. And then after that, he put Zod into this chokehold, but I didn't feel like it was a strong chokehold and like he was pinning down Zod. It's just the depiction, how it was depicted. I didn't get that feeling that Zod could do nothing else but blast rays through his eyes. because Zod was still talking. He was forcing to talk, but he was still talking. So that's the only thing. But that's me being very, very picky. Okay, and the same thing with Wonder Woman. With Wonder Woman, there was a certain point in time where Ares was just yelling, and Ares had changed. You could listen to his voice; he was a totally different. You hear Ares when he's talking to Diana. So it's really awesome how David Twillis transformed from Sir Patrick, this old man, to this sturdy, powerful Ares. You could feel Ares' presence. You can even see his muscles and stuff. And he's really strong and ripped. And he was just kind of pretending to be this old lame guy. And then, he's like, my dear, I do not want to fight you. Oh my goodness. It's just so good how he did that. But at the same time, it's like, kind of a letdown that Ares, in the end, in the final fight scene where he's grabbing all of those lightning bolts and sending them at Diana, even the way how he released the burst of energy from the lightning to Diana, it was kind of not emphasized. They didn't emphasize it. They kind of just showed him releasing it, and that was it. So it was just a little bit, I think they kind of fizzled out just to the final end. But Diana's final, running in there and jumping up into the sky and then shooting down, releasing the lightning bolt back at him, saying goodbye, brother, was really the big finale. But I just didn't like how Ares kind of lost it, sort of like, even if he lost it, lose it with some power, you know what I mean? He should have, really rained the power down on her. And you could see David Twillis with his little lisp, he's got this little lisp that goes on there. So it was just that little thing there was a letdown, I think, for me. But I love that Ares had a mustache. I love that he was pretending to be weak. I love that he was the spoil. That, I even thought it was Ludendorff. Was it Ludendorff? I didn't believe that, because there was this rumor out there that, David Twillis was Ares. And then people would come around and then say, no, it's really the guy who's playing Ludendorff who's Ares. But it turns out that was a foil, that the guy who was playing Ludendorff wasn't Ares. Ares was David Twillis, which was really fantastic. I was so glad. But, when these gossip go around, that's why all these gossip kind of spoil a movie for me. And I went and watched all the trailers and everything for Wonder Woman, all the clips and everything. I'm not going to do that next time. For this Justice League movie coming up, I'm not going to do that at all. But anyway, I would like to know from you who you rate as your number one villain in the DCEU. You see all the villains I just shared with you guys, and you determine which one is the greatest villain in the DCEU.